So Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn will rematch on November the 15th. The first one was brutal, and it was an absolute classic. Both of these men are warriors, and they bared their souls in the ring that night. But can the rematch match the intensity and the spectacle of the first fight? And who will win? To me, the main issue of this fight is the rehydration clause. And my understanding of the rehydration clause is that a fighter Chris Eubank Jr. is not allowed to weigh up to any more than 10 pounds. He's not allowed to go over 10 pounds of the limit that he weighs in the previous day. Conor Benn isn't either, but because Eubank is boiling down to a weight, this has a significant, or will have a more of a detrimental impact, or potentially more of a detrimental impact on him. So when he weighs in on the Friday, he can't gain more than 10 pounds, I believe, on the Saturday. That's my understanding. Many people believe that this had an impact on him in the last fight. So let's say if a fight is 100%, when you put in a rehydration clause, this could bring them down to 95%, 90%, 85%, 80%. Who knows? But what we do know is that if you go from 1 to 10, Chris Eubank cannot turn up with a rehydration clause and be at a 10 because he's physically compromised, for want of a better word. And from my understanding, the fight nearly collapsed because there was talks that the Eubank team wanted to take the rehydration clause out of the contract for the rematch. There was also an interview where Chris Eubank Jr. stated that he spent 2 nights in hospital. And to me, anyone who watched the fight can see that the rehydration clause had an impact, and it was a detrimental impact. However, we do need to be fair and acknowledge that Conor Benn was coming up. So he was coming up 2 weight divisions. So one could play devil's advocate and say, well, if Conor Benn's coming up 2 weight divisions and is compromising that weight, then it's only right that Eubank has to make some form of compromise. But the question is, if the compromises someone's health or compromises their punch resistance, when does that compromise become not only detrimental to someone being 100%, but also detrimental to their safety? And I think that's something that's really significant and really important. So I'm not a big fan of the rehydration clause. I'm not a big fan of the 10 pound rehydration clause. And I think obviously I understand why you would negotiate for that if you was Conor Benn, but it does put like a question mark on the fight with regards to rolling the dice with regards to safety. Anyway, with regards to the trainers in this fight, I'm assuming the trainers will be the same. So with Chris Eubank Jr., he'll have Jonathan Banks, and with Conor Benn, he'll have Tony Sims. Both are very high respectable trainers. So I think the significant factors apart from the rehydration clause would be strategically can Eubank be effective with the jab, and can Conor Benn nullify the jab? Can Eubank be effective with the short left hook, and can he utilize the counters? And also the other question would be, can Conor Benn introduce that right hand into the equation? Because if he can start hitting Chris Eubank Jr., start getting in range and hitting him with his big punches, then obviously his chances of success and his chances of winning the fight, they go up exponentially. I thought Conor Benn did good the last time. I thought he showed good head movement. I thought he showed good maturity, good boxing intelligence. And I think he gave a proficient test to Chris Eubank. And I think that Chris Eubank, I believe, delivered like a ridiculous amount of punches in the last couple of rounds, but no one could have predicted that. That was purely a testament of will. But Conor Benn was he performed well in that fight, considering that he'd never been on that big stage before and he didn't have that big fight experience. He definitely presented, he's shown himself in good light. And on one hand, you could say, who has the advantage? Well, Eubank won the fight, so naturally you would think he had the advantage. But the rematch, you would feel, would take more out of Chris Eubank Jr. than it would out of Conor Benn. So in theory, even without the rehydration clause, Chris Eubank Jr. is now more battle-worn than what he was before. However, Chris Eubank Jr. has experienced Conor Benn. He's experienced the puzzle. So therefore, he has more knowledge in solving the puzzle. But then Conor Benn has more knowledge in solving the Chris Eubank Jr. puzzle. So this is going to potentially be a fascinating contest because they're fighting not only for themselves, but for their fathers' names. There's a lot on the line here. And you can see from the first fight that they valued that. It wasn't just about the money. Clearly, boxing is about money. It's entertainment, and you have a short window to make a lot of money, and they did make a lot of money, but they also bared their hearts and soul in the ring, and that should be respected because they were both warriors. So I guess one of the questions would be, who has learned more from that fight? And it's really hard to say because I would assume that Tony Sims and Jonathan Banks would look at the tapes and would develop a specific strategy based on what their opponents did well and based on what their opponents did not so well. So what's going to be significant in the rematch, I think, is how do they both adapt to the new strategies that they're going to bring? Also, there might be other things in play, such as, I don't know who Chris Eubank Jr.'s nutritionist is, but I think considering that the rehydration clause is in place and considering that he clearly doesn't like boiling down to that weight, he needs to get the best nutritionist in the business. That is a part of his camp that he cannot neglect. We still don't know why. Well, when he got knocked out against Liam Smith, and Liam Smith can punch, of course, and he caught him with a great succession of punches. But before that fight, Eubank was always known for having extraordinarily great punch resistance. And the only explanation that seems valid, well, there's two explanations. Number one, if you get caught, you get caught, and that's it. But number two, there's another explanation that when Eubank boiled down I can't remember what he got down to, but when he boiled his weight down, he did it in a manner that compromised his punch resistance. And he's going to need to be the best version. If he can only bring 85% to the ring, he needs to be the best 85% that he can possibly be. So that's super important for him, because if he gets that wrong, then that increases the opportunity that Conor Benn could score a spectacular victory. And when I say spectacular victory, I mean a knockout. And if you look at round 3, I believed he hurt Chris Eubank Jr. He hurt Chris Eubank Jr. with, I can't remember what it was. I don't know if it was a straight right and a left hook, and then I think a right hook, but he definitely made a significant impact. And with Conor Benn, he punches through the target and he punches with absolute intensity. So when you look at Eubank, sometimes nowadays Eubank will shorten his punches up and he might take a bit of edge off the punches so he can punch more. But Conor Benn, he just delivers venom, so to speak, with every single punch. He doesn't take any weight off the punches. He just puts maximum effort into his punches, and those punches are dangerous. And if they do have exchanges, particularly at the beginning rounds or in the early rounds, Chris Eubank could be in some significant danger. I think it's potentially a great fight. I think the only bit I don't like is the rehydration element, but I think we're on par for another great matchup. And if it's a draw, or if Conor Benn gets a victory, it could lead up to a trilogy. If Conor Benn was to win, I would hope that I'm hoping that whatever happens, whoever wins, I'm hoping it's just a competitive, passionate affair that both can be proud of. Because even though Chris Eubank Jr. won the last one, they both can be proud of that. But I would hate to see either one really just get knocked out and just blitzed in a couple rounds. So hopefully the rehydration clause doesn't affect Eubank too much. And as I've stated, on one hand, you got the rehydration, but on the other hand, you got the 2 weight jumps. Because Conor Benn now has experience of actually doing that jump, he should be now more comfortable in doing that jump. So it's probably less likely to impact his speed, and he'll probably be able to put some extra venom into the punches. So this is a very intriguing matchup.